Well, here we are. Here we are. I don't know if you guys are surprised, but Jon Jones is retired now. I think most of us saw it coming. We were hoping, I guess, I can speak personally, but I was hoping that they'd pull it off, that they convince him, because whether you like it or not, whether you like Jon Jones or not, Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones as interim versus undisputed heavyweight champion would have probably been the biggest heavyweight fight in UFC history. And it would have actually revived the UFC in 2025, because right now it's not the best year. You know what I mean? In UFC history, it's not the best year. 2025, it's been pretty dull, pretty dead. Not the greatest pay-per-views, pretty weak cards. And so Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones was a glimmer of hope. I was very hyped up and excited for that one if they were going to pull it off. And obviously now it's not. So it's a bit annoying because obviously Tom Aspinall has wasted a lot of years, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy, a lot of mental anguish. Is that a word? Like where you're not sure about what's going on. It must be tough mentally to deal with that for so long. And, we're kind of looking back at like UFC 295 when Jon Jones first pulled out of that fight against Stipe Miocic, where at the end of the night, there was a clear interim champion. Why didn't the UFC just be like, listen, we tried to make that Stipe fight. You pulled out. It didn't work out. We're going to have to give that fight to the interim champion who's rightfully deserving of that opportunity, instead of the guy who's coming off the couch, 4 years inactive, just got KO'd by Francis Ngannou, who's about 40 years old, 45, whatever. It's like that was the rightful thing to do, but they decided not to do that. They decided to make Tom Aspinall wait on the sidelines. They decided to make Tom Aspinall defend an interim title while Jon Jones handpicked a 40-year-old retired fireman. And we had to wait. We had to wait until that fight happened a year later. And then a year after that Jon Jones pulled out the first time, where now the fight finally happened. It was UFC 309, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. We can finally get it out the way. Instead, we're still like giving him chances and chances and waiting and waiting and waiting. And listen, I get it. It's probably, like I said, it would have been one of the biggest fights in UFC history, probably the biggest heavyweight fight for sure in history. But there was like a time limit where there's a guy who deserves a shot, who's in his prime of his life. I mean, I'm repeating what everybody else says, and I know this. So it's like I'm not saying anything new, but I kind of don't get it. I just don't get why it took so long to finally figure out something that all of us were kind of like expecting for so long. It should have been, Jon Jones, listen, if you are the baddest man in the world, if you're the UFC heavyweight champion, you're going to fight the number one contender. You're going to fight not even the number one contender, the interim champion. And he pulled out. Sucks. He got hurt, but you know what I mean? That doesn't mean you just get to rebook fights that nobody wants to see, that nobody deserves. It's just, it sucks. It really sucks. And I just feel for Tom Aspinall the most, just because it's not even just like his fanfare, because now people are going to like him even more. I think like this whole situation makes Tom Aspinall even more likable. The way he's handled everything, you know what I mean? The way like Jon Jones trying to make us think that Tom Aspinall has been disrespectful, or he's been playing games. Like, Tom Aspinall couldn't have been more respectful throughout this entire lead up. I mean, listen, anybody in Tom Aspinall's shoes would have been frustrated, would have shown signs of frustration, would have, you know what I mean, said things that are disrespectful. And most of us would have been like, listen, it makes sense. Like, because I would have been frustrated in Tom's shoes, but he never did. He always said respectful things, that he understood the risk to reward ratio that, Jon Jones had to think about, and all this other stuff. Like, he was super respectful. And Tom Aspinall, throughout this entire thing, obviously he's being loved and liked by a lot of people because of this, and we rally behind him. But I mean, he's a prize fighter at the end of the day. That's what they do, right? They go in the cage and they fight for a living. That's their livelihood and their job. And it's been a year and a half, almost 2 years. He hasn't fought, hasn't cashed in a check, hasn't made money off of his entire momentum. So that's a lot of money just being wasted. But not only that, it's like the momentum is completely ruined and gone. You know what I mean? There was something going on with him. Like, he was fighting often, getting those those super quick knockouts. Now that it's gone a year and a half off, like I'm not saying it's gonna play a factor here, but it's definitely something to think about, and something Tom Aspinall will have to kind of fight off the rust a little bit in his next fight, because it's been a little while now. So it sucks. It really sucks. It's a little shitty situation, and I think Dana White and the UFC could have handled it so much better. So much better. You know what I mean? I feel like the decisions were obvious, but what we don't know as fight fans is that there's relationships, or there's probably agreements that are made behind the scene that probably have to be kept. And I don't know exactly what it was, and I don't know exactly why the UFC and Dana White have defended Jon Jones all those years after everything that he's done. I really don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand it, but there has to be a reason. And, Jon Jones and Dana White are probably not going to tell us that, but there just has to be. There's no way a guy who's done so much fault and dirt can be protected this way. It just feels weird. It really does feel weird, but you know what I mean? Now we're on to the next chapter. And even though, like I said, most of us are probably happy that, all right, we're moving on finally, it's still a bit of bitterness now. I still have it would have been so big. Like now you think about the rest of the heavyweight division, like what is it? Like Cyril Gane, Volkov. It's just like nothing fun really. Jailton Almeida. Like what interest is there at the heavyweight division? I think I saw a post from Ariel Helwani. They were talking about Francis Ngannou maybe being interested. Like, put all the ego aside. Please, por favor. All right? Put all the ego to the side and make that fight. That's the one fight. It would soften the blow of everything that just happened. Right? Because we wanted to see Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall for years. We wanted to see that fight for years. I've been talking about it and making videos about it for years. And now that we have to accept the fact that we're not going to get it because Jon Jones ran away. Dana White and the UFC, please put the ego to the side. And if Francis Ngannou is actually interested in coming back, Francis Ngannou versus Tom Aspinall for the undisputed heavyweight belt, come on. I know there's bad relationships and stuff like that, but after a situation like this where Jon Jones makes us wait for this long, it gives a super, super hyped up and engaging fight. Maybe not as interesting as Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones, but it's pretty damn close. And you also give an opportunity for Tom Aspinall to be in a fight that will generate money. Especially if he's champion, he gets pay-per-view shares. Francis Ngannou creates engagement, especially now that he's off. He's done the boxing things. There's going to be eyes on him a lot for sure. And the whole coming back to the UFC is going to be a big headlines. So it just makes sense to me. It makes sense. I know there's relationship issues, but it's if it makes money, it makes sense. And the UFC needs to understand this, that at the end of the day, they're a business. All right. You can't handle your business through emotions. All right. You need to handle your business through logic. And right now, Jon Jones gone. The biggest heavyweight fight in history has slipped through your fingers. What's the next best option? Definitely not Cyril Gane. Bring back Francis Ngannou if you can. And I'm sure Ngannou's right now realizing that in the PFL, there's not much for him. There's no more boxing fights for him after he got knocked out by Anthony Joshua like that. So he's going to come back. And he's probably not going to be as tough to deal with and negotiate with as he was before, when he was the UFC heavyweight champion. So it's I like the idea. And the best thing about this is that Ngannou's also getting pretty old. But people don't know that. But Ngannou's older than Jon Jones. He's about to turn 39, I think, in September this year. So what it does is it creates an engaging fight, hype, interesting fight, but it also gives most of the probability to still keep the belt on Tom Aspinall, who's the much more active fighter, who's going to be less of a headache to deal with at the negotiating table. And so it's a win-win. It's a win-win. Get these guys paid. Get Tom Aspinall a big fight after he lost everything. Get us interested back in a big heavyweight fight. And then most likely you will still keep Tom Aspinall as your champion. And going forward, you will have a guy who's pretty much, who just wants to fight. And that's the type of guy that you want to have as a champion. So that's my perspective on it. Let me know what you guys think. The UFC 317 Deeper Dive, Oliveira Topuria, is dropping tonight, hopefully. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, if you like these Yibugo tees, the link is in the description. All right, peace out, boys. Take care.